Who believed in you before you believed in yourself? For me, it was the women who saw something in me when I was just starting out. 20 years and 5 businesses later, I'm still here because they lifted me up when I needed it most. I'm Tania Gomez, and this is She Shapes Tomorrow, brought to you by Tania Gomez Consulting and Kismet, proudly sponsored by SN Services. Every episode, we sit down with women who are changing lives, building communities, and raising up the next generation. Women who'll remind you what's possible when we stop trying to do it alone. This year's International Women's Day theme is Give to Gain, and these stories will show you exactly what that looks like. Let's get into it. Welcome to She Shapes Tomorrow, the International Women's Day podcast. I'm your host, Tania Gomez, and today I'm joined by the lovely Amber Steele. Amber is a strategist at DeJong Reed, where she guides business owners through financial distress with clarity, empathy, and strength. Her leadership style is rooted in lived experience, growing up in foster care, supporting herself through school, studying and working full-time while she raised her daughter, and navigating an industry historically dominated by men. Amber is known for her ability to bring calm to chaos, helping people feel safe enough to ask for help and strong enough to rebuild. Her work has saved homes, protected families, preserved businesses, and helped clients regain hope at their lowest moments. Welcome, Amber. It's so lovely to have you here today.
Thank you, Tania. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, that's quite an introduction and quite a bio. It sounds like you've had both a very interesting life and also have a very interesting job.
Yeah, definitely. I would. Interesting is one way of putting it. That's for sure.
Yeah. So your life has been shaped by early independence, significant responsibility at a young age, and courage to back yourself when life felt uncertain. Prior to our interview, you shared that you spent part of your childhood in foster care and later moved countries to live with relatives you barely knew. How did those early experiences shape your resilience and I suppose also your sense of who you are?
Yeah, look, I think the early years really shaped probably everything about who I am today. And it's not that I like to sit in pity. I think it's just important that when I'm sitting across from other people, they understand I'm a person. I see them as a person, and I sort of highlight from both perspectives that there's a lot of sort of humanity underneath everything that I suppose sometimes gets missed traditionally in sort of male-dominated process-driven fields. So, a lot of my life really just taught me that you sometimes have to give stability to yourself. You really need to sometimes back yourself, and that's what I see in my clients. They were brave enough to go out and do things on their own, and from my life, sort of, starting a little bit earlier than others, I backed myself, and I've worked really hard to get where I am, and I can see that I've also had a bit of luck along the way that perhaps other people, by virtue of one sort of misguided decision, are in the positions that they're in. So I think it really did shape who I am and how I approach all situations, really.
Yeah. And by the age of 16, you were renting a room, working nights, paying your own school fees. That's not the usual experience for most people. What did that period of your life teach you about drive and discipline?
Yeah, similar. I think it's about, getting out of bed when potentially you really don't want to. Going and doing those things for yourself. Independence was super important to me. And I know that, independence really in terms of day-to-day life sits in financial independence. So as soon as I could sort of get a job and start doing things for myself, I did that, because otherwise there was going to be no change. So it's about sort of facing those hard, and I think that there's a couple of ways that you build it. You either are somebody who's born with it, and they want all these things for themselves, and they have the sufficient backing to understand that if I fall or I fail, I have a way out of it. And then there's the other side of it where you see sort of the life that you have if nothing changes, and you you drive that internally from a desire for something different or a desire for something more. And it's not that sort of I was, put in a bad position here. I think, I was moved to my biological dad, but he hadn't been around in my life, and he was, I suppose, handed to, relatively traumatized preteen girls, and he had 4 young kids of his own, and it just wasn't the environment that I probably needed at that time. So it was about taking my life, controlling it myself, and doing what I could to have that calm that I probably needed to get myself into this position. So I think it's really about sort of environmental factors and not overlooking those, because I also have a lot of respect for the people who do have the support and they still do decide to go out and try on their own and make a life for themselves, because that takes a lot of bravery in itself, particularly if you have a bit of a more standard life where you don't necessarily need to make all those decisions yourself. But either way, I think that it's really an internal driver.
Yeah. I have a similar story. I didn't grow up in foster care as such, but I left home. I got kicked out of home when I was about 17, and I was working. I did work nights, actually. I worked at a childcare centre that was open, and I worked there from 3 p.m. to midnight a lot of times, because it was great hourly rate at midnight, and it meant that it worked around school. And I feel like my drive was really cemented by me having to, like, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Like, there wasn't a way that I couldn't work. They're asking somebody to pay for my rent or pay for my food wasn't an option. So really had to. And I remember when my year 12 jerseys were released, and I just spent all of my money on the year 12 formal, right? I just saved up to pay for, the limo and pay for the dress and organize hair and makeup, and all of that was outside what I could afford. And then when the year 12 jersey came and we had to like pay for that, I was like, oh, I just can't. I have to like not get one. And I had a lovely friend at the time who bought one for me, because she was like, well, we're all going to wear them every day. You can't be the only one. And I didn't want to say it's because I couldn't afford it, but I think maybe people knew, because I was the only one living not at home. But I in hindsight, there's two parts of me. In hindsight, now that I'm a mum and I have a 14-year-old, which isn't that far off how old I was, I would never, I just couldn't imagine, not being there and buying those things for my children and not wanting to. And so some of me gets a little bit upset at the situation. But then on the other hand, I look at what I've achieved in my life and how resourceful I am. And I'm really grateful that I was in the position where I had to rely on myself, and I guess proved to myself that I could rely on myself. I often meet people who come from beautiful families, and, I hope my children think they come from beautiful families, and didn't have the types of adversity. And sometimes they really don't believe in themselves because they hasn't had a chance to test what they're capable of. And so I always think, when I'm not feeling sorry for myself, and not feeling angry at how it all happened, and that, when I let that teenage angst go, then I sit there and think, everything happens for a reason. And, a lot of women on this podcast have talked about turning pain into purpose. And, I'd never thought of it that way as much, but really I can see that how some of our challenges in life really do lay the path for then who we can become in the future.
Yeah, definitely. It's a weird dichotomy between sort of, yes, being proud that you've got this far and that you went through those things and that is kind of who you are, but also you can be a little bit empathetic to yourself and say, well, that isn't the way that we should have got here, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and for me, I realized that actually it's a choice, and that I could just choose differently as an adult, and I didn't have to continue to live like that. I didn't have to make the same decisions as other people made, and that gave me a lot of agency, and I felt that really empowering of, okay, well, now I live by myself. I can choose what I eat, and I can eat healthy or not, and I can choose how I get to work, and I can choose if I, either do drugs like maybe the other teenagers were, or if I decide to be healthy. All of these are actually up to me. And although that is sometimes a little bit overwhelming, it was also incredibly empowering of, the choice is now up to me, so I can make this work or not, but either's going to rely on me. And I think that makes quite a big difference. This idea of no one's coming to save you, right? Like it's all on you now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where I sort of look internally, and when I meet with my clients, and I allow them the space to sort of start in that really human aspect of, I get that it's a really personal and a difficult conversation for somebody to come and talk to somebody about. You talk about sort of, it's in the realm of the things that you don't really discuss: politics, money, religion, those sorts of things. And I'm asking them to come to me and, in a first meeting, lay it all out there. And that's not necessarily able to happen unless you really start the conversation with meeting them on a human to human basis and say, look, and we do talk, in our typical meetings initially about sort of Hank's story and how he started the firm, because that really does give them a little bit more comfort that there's no judgment here. But I also go to meetings and I do divulge potentially things about my personal life, because I'm not going to ask somebody to come to me and talk about one of the most intimate areas of their, circumstance without giving them anything either. So yeah, I think that it's really important that you have that sort of human view, even in a professional setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the role that you do. The title strategist
doesn't mean a lot to people.
It doesn't mean a lot, yeah. So what exactly do you do? And also the business that you work for is quite an unusual business also. Can you talk a little bit more about what your business does and what your role does, and how you help people through such a confronting time in their life?
Yeah, so our business is necessarily structured in the pre-insolvency space. So we do project manage through insolvency situations, but we're not the actual insolvency practitioners. So they sit outside our firm. We really meet with a client, and we do personal as well as corporate. So we really meet with them and we understand the exposure areas. So we have, 2 obligation-free meetings, and we go through, all of the circumstances. I want to know all of the history. I want to know whether you want to keep trading, whether you are at a point where you'd like to exit with minimal risk, personal circumstances, those sorts of things. And then when I get all of that information gathered, I go away and I develop the strategy for the client. So it's really about importantly understanding where the risk factors are, but also what their outcome that they're looking to achieve. So in terms of the way that we work, we'll go away and prepare a strategy. We document that. At the end of the day, I say to people that regardless, you get written advice and you can choose to engage. There's no pressure, but you get a little bit of a clearer pathway than you came to me with. And that's all I want out of these first couple of meetings. So when we have that second meeting, I run through the strategy with them. It's really about understanding that we go through the entire process together, because I think a lot of people in this instance will go to their accountant or their lawyer, and there's no one to really bridge the gap, because it really is this sort of niche area of both. So we'll develop that strategy, work through that with them. We've got support officers, which is where I actually started. So I started as a support officer while I was finishing my university degree. And then I stepped up into strategy. So the strategist develops a strategy and monitors the process, and the support officers effectively do all of the groundwork. And ironically, that's where we see a lot of sort of the women in our firm. And that's sort of necessarily why I'm in this position where I want them to see that they sort of deserve to be in this decision-making seat as well. So we'll work through the strategy with them. We get to, let's say, the end of the administration or liquidation or restructure. And that's really where I find a lot of value in this job is those final conversations with the client, where they're sort of in a position where they didn't think that their life could maintain what it has. So the business is still trading, potentially there's, for the most part, a portion of asset protection or things like that. Their employees are still have jobs. There's not a whole lot of change in their life, and I think that that's super important for them to see that they can have. So that's sort of necessarily what we do. There is instances where it might be that they just need somebody to do a negotiation, in which case we have a network of people who do those things. So we try to stay in our area of the wheelhouse, managing those and really holding the client's hand through the process, because it is quite daunting if you don't know what you're talking about. And it is something that people don't necessarily want to get their hands on. So that's where I think we're quite necessary in this space.
Wow. Now that space sounds very male dominated, lots of accountants, lawyers. It doesn't sound like there would be very many young women that are, good role models there. As you said, they're kind of not really looking at the strategist role as something that could be potentially, something for them. For when you started in that role, did you have some imposter syndrome? Was it challenging at first to kind of figure out how you sit in a seat where there'd been so many other males dominating dominating the conversations?
Yeah, definitely. I think imposter syndrome is certainly something I've lived through, and I still sometimes feel it. I think it really heightened that spotlight I had on myself of, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? And when I started training as a strategist, I was training under a strategist called Sophie, and she was a young lawyer. So I really had that role model already to say, look, I can be that. But I think in a lot of firms and a lot of meetings, often I'm the only female there, and it might be, my wife does the books or something, but it's typically a male director, a male accountant. We do have a bit more diversity in terms of accounting for sure, but typically the business owners are men as well. So it took me a little while to show up with that self-esteem, I think, and understand that I actually really do know what I'm talking about, and I don't have to be an expert at everything to be good at this. They're not expecting me to be an accountant or a lawyer. I'm a pre-insolvency consultant, so that's really where I directed. I think I spent a lot of time trying to know everything about everything, so that if anyone asked me a question, I would have the answer, because I think as women, we definitely put a lot more pressure on ourselves to not have to say I'm not sure, because that's something that, and I now that I've sort of stepped back and recognized the patterns, I do step back and I do see men all the time say, I'll come back to you. And I just don't know why it's so difficult for us. We feel like we have to do all of this additional background work just to validate our position at the table. And I think that provided that you're comfortable in your area and you do, like I've done a lot of additional work in terms of, readings and things that on top of maybe another strategist here who came from banking, and, will often, if we go to a meeting together, I will say something and they'll look at Darren, and it's just like, actually, and then he says to individuals, particularly if it's about small business restructures, oh, she's the expert. Like, I actually don't know. And it's funny because I think as a woman, we would probably never sit there and say, oh, I don't know, he's the expert, because we're already in this position where we see ourselves a little bit down from the rest of the individuals that in the room. But yeah, it was certainly something that I had to work on, because I think it's an internal driver again about it really does highlight these views that we have upon ourselves, and it probably did. Those were shaped in my early development anyway. So shifting my mindset out of being, that kid who probably didn't feel worthy, to now understanding that I certainly am, and there's a lot of individuals in this firm and across, the others that we work with that certainly deserve more.
Yeah. And you said that strength comes from understanding both the technical and the human side of work. How did you learn to trust that combination?
I think I learned it by doing the work. And obviously the technical side was really developed as being a support officer. I did all of the how we do it, not necessarily just why we do it. So I've done all of the processes, the structure, understanding from the back end of it exactly what needs to be done to get the end result. And then I had to sort of go back and learn a bit more of the human side, because as a support officer, I did have a lot of the sort of day-to-day management of the file and working with the clients and dealing with the times where they didn't feel like, there was a light at the end of the tunnel, because sometimes these processes can take a long time. And I think when they're presented this strategy at the beginning, it feels like a weight lifted off their shoulders, and sometimes over time that weight can come back slightly, and the support officer really has to do the human side then. But meeting with a person initially, and understanding that, I think people often say that the first 5 minutes of a meeting you shouldn't talk anything about your job. You should start to meet person to person, and when I came from a retail background, so I was already very good at dealing with different types of people minute by minute, sort of understanding that conversation is important. But moving into a strategist role, I already had the knowledge of the foundation, but I really needed to get into how to be a good person so that they would open up to me.
Yeah, building rapport and building trust so they feel comfortable to continue talking to you about, deeply sensitive, upsetting information.
Yes, yeah, certainly. And it's not that it's a quick meeting. The first meeting is at least an hour. So it's a lot of, sometimes they can, and I found in the start, sometimes I would feel them leave a little bit, more weighted. It's almost like therapy. You go to therapy, you leave crying. You feel like it should be the opposite. But I do now have a really good sort of way of making sure that I've given myself enough time to get through that rapport building. But it really is about building trust and understanding that I'm happy to come to the table with information about me, the firm, and they can do the same. But also having time at the end to make sure that they're not leaving feeling worse, because I don't want that in anyone that I meet, whether it's a client or a referrer or a friend or someone at the shops. Like I try to be, helpful, or at least a person that might give, somebody a little bit of hope. I actually took my daughter to the shops the other day, and she was buying something, and the lady at the counter, she said, Scarlett said, I really like your nails. And she was so shocked and touched, because Scarlett's only 12. She's not necessarily big. And it was such a proud moment that I feel like she's actually watched the way that I interact with people, any person, and done that for herself. And it was just a really nice moment. So in a long way around, across both of the I suppose areas of my job, I try to take that into life, and then it becomes across in work a lot more authentic. And I think that's why women actually really should rise, because we are quite authentic, empathetic individuals across the board, and it's undervalued.
Yeah, it's interesting. I help people through understanding the audit process and understanding compliance for disability providers, and primarily that's what I do. And I kind of have a similar job. Everyone is stressed when they come to me. No one really wants to go through audit. It's quite a stressful time. I have a lot of crying clients. I get a lot of upset clients, and not because they've failed, just because the stress of the unknown and how much work, and they have this weight of what has to be worked through. And I think one of the difficult things is trying to build that rapport in the time that you have, but also kind of give them some clear direction and make sure that they're listening and taking that in, because we can't just talk about the upset and the overwhelm. We actually have to now get a plan in place to move out of overwhelm, to start taking some actions to move towards the goal. And it can be a bit of a balance. How do you work through that? How do you balance compassion with having to be clear and potentially give difficult advice?
Yeah, I suppose the way that we structure our meetings is quite important as well. Obviously, I always start my first meeting and make it clear that this is information gathering. I do initially, when I meet somebody, I'm quite aware of the couple of strategies that potentially would work for them. So I do give them in that meeting, because that's the one that's mostly heightened in terms of emotion. So I think it's about splitting those two sort of needs in terms of emotional support and clear action, giving them, so when they leave the first meeting, I can say, look, these are the couple of things I'm looking at. This is the high level. These would be the outcomes. I'm going to go away and prepare something for you. I will tell you when it's ready. I'll let you know if I need anything else. If you have any questions, you have my information, you can call me. So they're not leaving still searching for a solution. They feel a little bit more held. And then we come to the next meeting and I present the clear path then. So it's more preempting a plan, and I don't like to sort of pigeonhole and say this is what's going to work, because I could go away and look at some information and go, that's definitely not going to happen. So I give them, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel slightly from the beginning. I give them that emotional release, and then I give them the clear information in a more structured way in the second meeting, where I start off by saying, look, this is a large document. That's why we're going to work through this together. And that really starts the way that we work through the whole project, because when they understand that, you know, we have the plan, we're going to give it to you at a time where it's going to be a little bit separated. So I think the way that separating out those two things is super important, but they're both equally as important as each other. But I do think there has to be some level of clear plan, or a commitment to a clear plan in the heightened emotion. Bring it down, understand that there's a number of options, there's all of these outcomes, and it's also about understanding if you do nothing, this is what's going to happen, because sometimes that's a lot better than what they actually expect. You know, people expect bankruptcy means they're going to lose everything, somebody's going to come through their house and take all of their belongings. That's not factual. So sometimes it's about just settling those. If you, worst case scenario, this is what would happen, and this is the likely outcome, and then how do we make that better? That's the first meeting. Second meeting is really about giving that full, clear direction in writing that they can refer back to, and that they don't have to make a decision on right then.
Yeah. I guess the structure there leads them down a path as well where they're really clear, because I think the unknown and what happens next is often, you know, part of the stress.
Yes, unknown is a big one.
Yeah. When you think about your current role, what impact do you hope that your work leaves on your clients, your colleagues, and I suppose even the broader industry?
Yeah, I think I want to take away some of, and I know this is slightly impossible, but I want to take away some of the stigma about financial distress. I think that the stigma really pushes people sort of further down the path, and people don't want to talk about hard parts of their life. So I be open about the things that I've gone through that were challenging. So I really want to push the industry away from that shame, understanding that, you know, asking for help doesn't mean that you're a failure. It's actually quite brave to do. And I think that reaching out early is obviously super important for us because we've got more options, more time. But in terms of industry, it's really about that. My colleagues, I think that I want them to see that there is a trajectory outside of support roles. That, you know, you can do the hard things, you can have, you know, the full-on single parent life and still do really well at work, and you can study. And I think there's a lot of people who go, I'll do that one day, or they sit in the comfort. And I think that all of the growth happens outside of your comfort zone. Like sitting here talking about myself is not my comfort zone outside of one-on-one with a client. So I think that, you know, pushing colleagues to really want more for themselves, or see that because they probably do want more, but see that they can actually have it, is super important to me. My clients, I really just want the impact that they understand that they've gone through something, that they weren't alone through the process, and that, you know, they're worthy of what they have as well. They're worthy to continue, because I think a lot of people struggle with, you know, the idea of getting out of the situation, you know, potentially unchanged, or you know, in the same sort of financial situation, having the same business, but potentially leaving some creditors behind. But I want them to see that all of the good things that they're doing for, you know, themselves, employees, economy, by continuing.
Beautiful. International Women's Day theme for 2026 is Give to Gain. What does Give to Gain mean to you in the context of your life?
Oh, I think give to gain for me is about presence. Like it's not these grand gestures that people sort of highlight or think that it needs to be. I give support and I gain some trust. I give time and you gain connection. Things that you already have that aren't necessarily grand, they're not expensive. You give empathy and you gain impact for other people. I think for me, it's about giving resources because in a large part of my life, I guess I didn't really have that. I didn't have that somebody to just sit with me. And now I can give that to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important one as well. I think presence is so important and so underrated. And yeah. When you look back at the woman you are today, after everything that you've built and created, what would you tell your younger self who was working at night, studying, trying to get through day by day? What would you tell that younger version of yourself?
Oh, this one probably makes me a little bit emotional. Look, I would really tell her that it's going to be okay. I think that's important. That I just don't think that she ever understood how far she would go, how far her resilience would take her. And also that, like we said earlier, that you would one day come to appreciate these times when you're in a moment of, gratitude. I would tell her that she's going to build a life that she's proud of, because I think that is really something that I probably needed, and I definitely give to my daughter and give to other people around me, because I definitely didn't have those things, but that looking back, it would really be the foundation of my strength anyway.
Yes. What message do you want women listening to this conversation to carry with them as they shape tomorrow in their own industries and with their own families?
I suppose it's really just about bringing your full self to the table, that you really deserve to be there. Support doesn't have to be loud, but you also don't have to be quiet. I think we often have, we've got internal meetings once a week where the design of that is to really bring up issues and create solutions. And I'm not scared to bring up issues. I'm not scared to sit in a room and be quiet. I think that a lot of women need to hear that what you have to say is valid and it's worthy, and you don't have to be the quietest in the room either. Although I sort of started this conversation with that my strength really is in the listening and those sorts of things, but I also do a lot of talking, and really just to lift each other up. I think again, it can be a quiet sort of, you've got this reassurance, or it can be somebody who might need representation. I can be the voice, potentially cause a little bit of trouble in the HR department, but outside of that, I think sometimes when you show somebody that what they have to say is valid and you say it for them, then they realize, no, actually I can do this for myself.
Yeah, that's very true. Finally, where can people find out more about DeJong Reed or the work that you do if they wanted to get in touch?
Yeah, so primarily we sort of obviously work across our website, LinkedIn. I think there's Facebook and Instagram if that's still your thing. For the most part, it's just www.djra.com.au, and all of our contact details are on there. So there's information about all of the strategists, all of the support officers, excellent photos that probably need some updating, but outside of that, that's really where we share our sort of education guidance. And we also have, I believe, a YouTube. We do a lot of webinars and things. I think early next year, the first webinar is going to be with the ATO, so that'll be interesting. But we're across all of the platforms.
Amazing. And you'll also be at our Gold Coast and our Sydney International Women's Day events. So I'm really looking forward to meeting you then and to seeing your team.
Yeah, it will be lovely. I actually can't wait.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Tania. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Wasn't today's guest amazing? Imagine being in a room with over 100 women like her. That's our 2026 International Women's Day events, happening across Western Sydney, Gold Coast, Adelaide, and Perth this March. You'll meet women building businesses you want to learn from. Leaders are solving problems you're facing right now, and the kind of people who become your text at midnight support system. That's not networking, that's give to gain. Find your event at taniagomez.com.au. I'll be there, and I hope you will be too.